Hello YouTube, my name's Sean Connors and welcome back to The Outsiders. I'm joined with Paige, who's going to be, for this purpose of this video, she's going to be my Dr. Watson, and I'm going to be Sherlock. Why am I comparing my DMing style to Sherlock Holmes? Is it because I believe I'm some sort of super intellect? No. But what I want to get to very quickly is quantify the reasons why I'm pinning my GMing style on something similar to Sherlock Holmes, is because of the way that he analyses things, because of the way that he breaks things down and utilises them. And I think and it's very scientific, and I think that is my GMing style. That every single one of us is going to be quite different. But I found recently, when I was looking at something I loved as a boy, so when I looked back and I looked at the works of Sherlock Holmes again, I was a huge fan of the work of Arthur Conan Doyle's and the character of Sherlock Holmes, and we're going to come to that in a minute about the character of Sherlock Holmes. I found it a great influence. I never realised until recently how much of an influence that's actually been. Now I know that I've made a game in the Sherlock world. I actually made a game of an investigative style game around that period of history, which I loved and went down very well with my players. I know that I enjoy investigative stories. I don't run them all the time, otherwise, that'd be pretty boring. But I am able to say with some confidence that I know that my style of GMing is very much follows many of the analogies that Sherlock Holmes uses, which is fascinating when you realise the connections. And I'm going to cover that off in this series of videos. I'm going to start first of all with the character of Sherlock Holmes here. So when you use the word Sherlock Holmes, you will have an image come to mind. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is for many people that might be things like, deerstalker, coat, his pipe, it could be his violin, it might be the fact he, dabbled with drugs, it might be the intelligence, whatever it is, you will have an image of him come to mind. What's fascinating straight away is that there's a psychology to that image, isn't there? There's a psychology, it's an important one. What's the matter? You can't see. Can you see now? Can you see? Good. It's important to see, isn't it?
Daddy, I'm a dog.
Yeah, your dog, that's right, I'm Sherlock. Okay? Yeah, your dog, I'm Sherlock. Right, so we've covered that. So, there's an important psychology to this, and you're going to see a lot of the methods used by Sherlock are actually very apt. For people that know me will know that actually it makes sense. Now, a lot of those as well will be very applicable to very experienced GMs. Now, this particular series of videos is not aimed at a beginner at all. And I don't mean that, and normally I try to focus on those quite heavily, but this is a very different type of tip. This is the sort of thing you can really only do when you have a few years of DMing experience under your belt. I don't think it really works when you've only got 1 or 2 years. I don't think it really works. I think you need 5, 6, 7 more years of experience under your belt. And then it all starts to make sense why you want to do this. Now, you'll know if you followed my channel for a few years that when my channel started out on YouTube, I did say I don't want to analyse myself. I don't want to break myself down, because if I do that, I'm quite frightened about, if I analyse something that's not broken, I'm going to break it, and it's not going to have the mysticism. It's not going to have the mysticism or the attraction that it once held. How wrong was I to think that? How far removed from the reality was that? Now, obviously, when I went onto YouTube world, came into the YouTube world, I realised that it's important to self-analyse, because the audience, yourselves, need to be able to see someone who can look at themselves, be honest, break it down, and then sort of find out what works for them, what makes them tick. And that's what we're doing in this series of videos. I'm actually really analysing myself. I'm using Sherlock Holmes because it's the closest thing that I've found, for many reasons, that's very close to my own GMing style, and I'm convinced it had a huge impact on me as a GM, with me not knowing it. When people say things like, these books we credit to the work, like Appendix N, these are the books that influenced us. Well, I'm convinced as a GM that all of us have influences throughout our life for us as GMs. Whether you're the casual GM or whether you actually take it as seriously perhaps as I do, and I know many of you do. We all have influences. Now, for me, it was Sherlock Holmes. Now, one of the very first things that Sherlock talks about in his work is basics. And that's what we're going to talk about first today. Now, in Sherlock's world and in the GM's world are two different things. In Sherlock's world, it's all about being a great detective, so there are many influences for him. But the same analogy would be true for a GM. And when he talks about basics, we would all have a different answer for that. What do we believe the basics are? What are they? What do we think they are? I'm going to just tell you my thoughts quickly. I mean, and they're going to be probably quite deeper than most people think. So that's actually knowing the system. That's actually knowing the players. That's understanding how to use the dice, how to use the screen. That's understanding the setup of the game, where you want your players. That's understanding the body language. That's understanding all these are basics. These are not pushing the envelope. So really, what I'm saying here is there's quite a lot to learn before you have mastered the basics. And what exactly is basics? It's actually quite a few hours of getting behind the table. There's many hours of putting the theory into practice, running games, running not just one narrow bandwidth of game, multiple genres. Everything has an influence, everything will help you. The reason why you need the basics, things snap into place. Let's talk about the basics in Sherlock's world and quantify it with a finishing story. So let's do that. Now I'm going to quote you from the book, the great book itself. The steps to 221B Baker Street, how many are there? Is the question Holmes brought before Watson in A Scandal in Bohemia, and a question that never once has left my mind. As Holmes and Watson sit in their matching armchairs, the detective instructs the doctor on the difference between seeing and observing. Watson is quite baffled, and then all at once everything becomes a little bit crystal clear. When I hear you give your reasons, Watson remarked, the thing that always appears to me to be so ridiculously simple that I could easily do that myself, surely. And at each successive instant of your reasoning, I'm baffled until you explain your process. And yet, I believe that my eyes, in this case my ability, is as good as yours. Quite so, Holmes says, lighting a cigarette and throwing himself down into an armchair. You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is actually quite clear. For example, you've frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room. Frequently? How often? Well, some hundreds of times. Then how many are there? How many I don't know. Quite so, you have not observed, and yet you have seen. That is just my point. I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen them and observed them. Now, what Sherlock is really doing here is, in his world, applying what he sees as principal basics, important things that are the cornerstones of what he does as a great detective, the little differences. I actually believe that the basics in GMing are equally as fundamental to getting the very best game out that you can, consistently, time after time after time after time. I'm going to now turn a story that probably would happen. If we were to put Watson and Sherlock on the Empire State Building, arrive at the same time, have a little bit of money each, and be thrown this question, and you can imagine there are the telescopes that you put coins into. The first person to spot a plane wins. I think it's logical to think that Watson would rush across to one of the telescopes, put a coin in and begin scanning the sky to see one. He may get lucky. Sherlock would take a more measured approach to this, probably take a moment out, consider his options, move across to a different telescope and observe a plane. How did he know it was coming? Because in Sherlock's world, what he would have done is thought about where the airport is in relation to the building, when the flights are. He would have calculated his best chance of spotting a plane, and then gone across, put the coin in and seen it. And we all know that the great detective probably would have won, based on some logic. But to anybody observing that, it would have seemed just as lucky as Watson. Watson was just unlucky. But of course we know there's no such thing as being really unlucky. There's a method in every little detail that makes him stand out to be something far more than it first appears. And obviously he is, but there's a reason. Now in this series of videos, we're really going to delve into breaking down really my own style of GMing, which I believe is quite scientific and takes a very similar approach to the methodology, the method that Sherlock applies. I really believe I've actually done this psychologically without thinking, applied it into my GMing, applied it into the way I break things down, and now it's more clear to me. I'm able to share that with you. Not saying that any of you will have that same method, probably not, will differ, but there probably are influences that you can then suddenly lock onto, the reasons why you do things, which will probably open up some great understanding in your own game and your own technique, and even make you realise where you are as a GM at this stage. And remembering, exactly like that story, that, as Watson said, we can all do this, but I just can't yet. I don't understand your method. But once you do, the answers become more clearer. And that's what we're going to look at. I hope it makes sense. It's something I really wanted to do. And I hope you allow me the opportunity to put the videos out and explore this in a little deeper fashion, now that I've fully recovered from my bout of God knows what it was, and go through it with us. I don't know how many videos it's going to take, but I think it's going to be a great ride to have a look and see. And I think you'll find them of some use. I hope so anyway. For anybody that is fairly new at GMing, there's bound to be some nuggets of important stuff in here, and at the very least what it's going to do is make you realise that you're on a journey. There's a lot you have to cover off before you cover. Don't worry about covering the base off. Even if it takes a few years, it doesn't matter. The point is, everybody has to go through that process to really get to a greater understanding of what they do and the reasons they do it. There are no real shortcuts, because exactly like we think there are. This is something I think we can leave the video on. We think we can shortcut. Sometimes we think we can help you by giving tips out, and I realise that that's true. Yes, we can help a little, but the truth is sometimes it's not so much the answer, 17 steps. It's the understanding of the process to why it's important, and I think we sometimes miss that. So by going deeper into my own style of play, I hope that will help every single GM analyse themselves, help themselves, develop further, find greater ways of understanding. And from me and Paige, all that leaves us to say is, what do we say? It's goodbye from me and happy gaming.
Happy gaming.
Thank you very much. Right, take care of yourselves and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.